Hi all, my name is Matt from Ratho Quarter. This is the second video in a series of videos walking through the mixing of my song Basilisk. In this video we'll be taking a look at the mixing of the bass guitars, which was definitely more complex than the drums, which we showcased in the first video. I hope some of the approaches I show in this video are useful to you in some way. There is a link to the finished song in the description below. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Okay, so we're going to be looking at bass now. The bass sound in this track was pretty complicated, to be honest. And the main reason for that is that obviously the guitars are in a bass 6 tuning. So that's a standard E, but a whole octave below a standard tuned guitar. So I really wanted the bass to be an octave below that. Obviously you don't have to do it that way. You can have your bass guitar play in unison with your bass 6. But just because of the nature of this song, I wanted it to be an octave below, just so that it had that big, powerful, low, heavy vibe to it. I don't own a bass guitar that will go that low, that I can tune that low. I'm not sure there are many bass guitars you could tune that low realistically. So I've decided to rely on a virtual bass, which is this gin bass, which is a sampled, I think it's a Dingwall, sampled off a Dingwall bass, but it's just a virtual sampled bass guitar. So what I've effectively done is I've just used the DI signal from that, and then I've bounced it out and have then added my own processing. Obviously gin bass kind of comes with some built-in processing, but I've decided I just wanted to do my own processing to that. In addition to the kind of like more MIDI driven bass guitar, there's also a kind of cleaner, quieter, more arpeggiated section of the song, several sections like that. And for those, I didn't feel like they needed to be a whole octave below. They're more delicate. They don't need that kind of like big, robust tone to them. So I was more than happy to just play those up in a kind of regular E1 tuning on my bass guitar, and that I've played that on my my Squier 5-string jazz bass, which is basically tuned to drop A, but what that means is the next 4 strings are just in standard E. So obviously there's 2 different kind of approaches to the bass that I need to try and tackle. In terms of the tone for the heavy section, let's maybe look at that first. I guess what I've tried to do there is, there's a bass tone that I made for a previous song a while ago, and it was kind of trying to mimic an approach that Nolly had, Nolly Get Good, that he had, that I saw in a video ages and ages ago. And I didn't really kind of like, I didn't have all the plugins and whatever to mimic it too closely, but I was doing my best with the tools that I had to try and kind of mimic that sound, because it felt like it would work really well with this particular song. So let's step through it. So effectively there's 2 bass tones. We've got the bass dirt and then we've got the bass clean, and those represent the 2 different kind of tonally different sections of the song. So all of this is where there's like big heavy guitars happening, and that's encompassed by this bass dirt, and then the more delicate arpeggiated section is encompassed by this bass clean. So what I'll do is I will just turn off all of the processing on everything, and we can just step through it, starting with the dirty bass, and see what it all sounds like. So first thing we should hear, let's also turn off these. So all we've got is our kind of MIDI DI, which is coming from gin bass, and no processing at all, and that sounds like this. So yeah, just a kind of really decent quality sounding bass DI. It's pretty compressed already, but yeah, no processing on that at all. So first thing I've done obviously I mentioned I've built a similar bass tone to this previously, but I kind of wanted to do it a little bit differently last time. It felt like a bit of an overly scientific exercise last time, and this time I wanted to just be a bit more fun and a bit more instinctive. And a plugin I've had a lot of fun with before is this, and I think this is actually free, is basically this SansAmp emulator. It's called TSC Audio BOD Bass Overdrive, and this is rad. This, like, there's a lot of like tone shaping that can happen just with this. I mean, it sounds really cool straight away just with that plugin, I would say. I mean, you can hear this first like low E0. I mean, it's just so low. There's almost barely a kind of clear, fundamental, discernible note there. Anyway, so we're basically trying to take that really low sound and just trying to make something vaguely listenable out of it and keep it being powerful and supporting the guitars. So first thing is this BOD. Nice and simple, like fairly clean sound. I think there's a bit of drive in there, but not loads. And obviously the philosophy with this bass sound, and I've treated both these kind of more like chorus guitars, these dirty chorus guitars, chorus bass rather, and then the verse bass, I've treated them in the same kind of way, which is like a very typical metal bass guitar approach of like splitting the signal or duplicating the signal and having one be your kind of like lower, cleaner, pretty compressed, clean tone, and then you have another one which is like more high passed and it's distorted, often with a guitar amplifier. It sounds quite nasty, and I think the idea with that is to basically try and meld it with your rhythm guitars so that between the guitars and the bass it just sounds like one massive instrument. In this particular case, the bass guitar part isn't mimicking the guitar line exactly. It's more just like the big kind of key notes, certainly in this section of the song. But yeah, the kind of higher section of the tone, the higher, dirtier part of the tone does go some way to kind of help marrying it with the sound of the guitars. Anyway, back to the kind of low, clean section. What's next? It's a Fab Filter compressor preset, just called Punchy Bass Guitar. And I think I have probably just ended up adjusting the threshold just so that the compressor is acting just on the kind of peaks of the signal that I want it to. Obviously, this being a VST, a virtual instrument, it's pretty compressed already. I mean, you can see that from looking at the waveform. It's not overly dynamic, certainly not compared to my actual bass guitar. You can see there's a lot more dynamics there. But yeah, kind of worth compressing it a little bit just to make sure there's nothing getting out of control, especially given this is quite as low as it is. And it's like, what, 1.5 dB of compression, not much more than that. So next in the list, right, so this is like going into the process of splitting the bass signal, or at least partitioning it so that this is just a big old EQ, just killing all of the high end in this tone, because we want this part of the bass tone to be looking after very much the low end, and we want it to be cleaner. This is very similar to the kind of that bass plugin called Parallax. It'll do this kind of thing all in one plugin on a single bass signal. Obviously, I mean, I do own that plugin, but I wanted to process this in a slightly different way that you can't really do with Parallax. So I've ended up kind of setting it up myself. But this is obviously getting rid of all of the high end in that signal. That's what it's getting rid of, that little bit you can hear now. So that is the clean portion of the big bass sound. Let's have a look at the next one. So obviously this is literally duplicated. That's the DI signal. And then the first thing we've added, right, obviously this, we're going to add some processing, which is probably like more like a guitar amp. We're going to make it sound really distorted and really dirty. And you don't really want to apply that kind of processing to like a super low instrument. So as the first port of call, I've effectively I've just high-passed everything. I've gotten rid of all of the low end below about 350. And that is affecting our DI signal. And so you can hear that's getting rid of all of that content. So all we've got is this kind of like upper mid thing. Then next in the list, I have used a Fortin Nameless. Now I was a bit worried with my previous recordings, certainly the single before this one, that perhaps the guitars just sounded a little bit polite, the distorted guitars. And I was using the Archetype Nolly plugin, which is an awesome plugin, and loads of the presets and the amps sound really, really good. But I wanted something that was a little bit more obnoxious and a bit more, I guess, just a little bit less polite sounding. So during the process of mixing this, I actually purchased this Fortin Nameless, the Neural DSP Nameless plugin. I'd seen a couple like really decent producers using it, and it seemed like it was very well suited to the super low tune stuff. So I've decided to use that on this higher distorted portion of the bass tone too. And I've just used this Ola England preset. The pedals and cab are all engaged. Let's see what I'm doing here. No, I think that's just default. I haven't really changed anything there. And so this should make it sound pretty ugly. Which it absolutely does. And then obviously I felt like I've gone a little bit too far, because once again I've pulled out this like Soothe plugin, and the preset is literally called Electric Guitar Deharsh. So, I've gone with the Nameless, thinking I want to make it sound a bit more gnarly, and then pulled out the Soothe to, I guess, calm it down a bit. So let's just turn that on. It's very subtle, but you can hear it getting rid of some of the harsh frequencies there. And then finally, I have just got this EQ, which is just kind of notching out a little area around 200 Hertz. And I'm guessing my thinking there was basically to just make a little bit of room for the snare drum, particularly in these like more mid-focused, distorted bass guitar sounds. So that then is that's the clean portion of the bass sound, and that's the dirty portion of this bass sound. And let's have a look. Yeah, so coming into that like master bus, all of that processing is turned off. And so those two sounds together sound like this. So it sounds pretty good, like big, gnarly sound. But what I wanted to do in addition to this, and this came from me reading up about George Lever and his production work with Sleep Token. And obviously some of their riffs or some of their guitar sounds are very low tuned. And something that he had done is add a real bass guitar performance to a kind of synth MIDI bass, just so that there was some additional kind of clank and like a little bit of humanity to what was effectively a virtual bass tone. And so that's what I've tried to do here. I've obviously programmed out this whole bass riff in line with my guitar riff, and then I've had to go and learn it, which was actually quite tricky because some of these areas have like weird like little syncopated stops and ghost notes and things. And then I've tried to blend that in with the Gin Bass VST, just so that at least my guitar performance, my bass guitar performance, is also included in this track. And let's just take a look at what that's doing. Okay, so like super simple. That's now in unison with the bass 6. So that's an octave higher than than most of what's happening here with gin bass. Although obviously it's all the same notes. And then what have I done? Yeah, okay. So I've treated this in the same way as the kind of distorted, dirty part of this tone. It's like a second layer to that, if you like. So I don't know why I've not used FabFilter. I've used the Studio One stock EQ, probably because I get a bit like paranoid that too many FabFilter plugins will kill my CPU performance or something. It probably doesn't, but whatever. So that's doing exactly the same thing as this on the other DR signal, which is just removing a whole bunch of low end. That's all that's doing. And to be fair, that's probably sensible. Like you wouldn't want the low end of the real bass guitar mixing with the low end of the virtual bass guitar. You would get like micro tuning problems, and it would probably sound awful. So I've just gotten rid of a whole bunch of that low end, and then I've run it through the archetype Nolly with a preset called the D word, which looks like it's completely unadjusted. And that is a preset that I use on my rhythm guitars all the time. And then what have I done after that? Again, it's another kind of high pass EQ. Not exactly the same, but I guess I felt like this archetype Nolly was adding some additional low end once it was distorting that incoming signal. And so I've just felt like, okay, I need to get rid of more of that. So how does this sound? Yeah, so I mean, it definitely sounds a bit more polite, I would say, than the Fortin Nameless. And you can also hear the noise gate working on the signal. Maybe working a bit too efficiently there, but obviously you don't want all of the junk in the spaces between those notes coming out. So let's listen to all three of these together. Obviously, all three of these representing one big bass sound. I mean, there's an argument to say it potentially sounds better without that, but I think it's nice to have it in there. So there's an actual real performance going along with that DR signal, and like trying to learn how to play these little bits was quite fun too. Like that kind of weird syncopated little sound. Okay, so that's like all of the ingredients of that bass tone. Let's go to the master bus and see what's happening. All of those are obviously getting sent to this bus. And I think this is probably where I was trying to imitate a tone that Nolly had made, obviously just with my own spin and in my own way. So what's the first thing on the list? Just some EQ shaping, getting rid of some super low end, scooping out some mid, and then boosting the high. I think I was probably just trying to level out the frequencies a bit, and I felt like it needed some emphasis in the high end. And that'll also become clear a little bit later on when we'll introduce a step which will actually darken the sound and take out some of that high end. So next on the list, this is a multi-band compressor which is only really operating on this one band, which is everything below 115 hertz. You can also see that I've got the sidechain activated, and that sidechain is linked to the kick drum. So this won't do anything now because the drums aren't playing, but it's obviously basically your kick drum will live mostly around 100 hertz. So I've kind of gone, and I think I've probably decided like, oh, maybe it's a bit closer on this, with this particular kick drum, it's a bit closer to 115 hertz. So let me just nudge it a little bit further up, and this will then duck the bass guitar signal, that all those three separately processed signals coming into this bus. It'll duck all of those every time the kick drum hits, which is kind of what you want, just to make a little bit more space for that kick drum. Then, and this I don't always do, but I've enjoyed what it does to this sound when I've worked in this way previously. And this is basically feeding all of that stuff, which is I don't know how wise it is really, but like obviously I've got one signal going through a Forza nameless with the cab activated, and then I've got another one going through an archetype nollie also with the cab activated. Yes. And then I'm pushing those into an impulse response loader, which anyway, I'm not sure how kind of wise that is, but it kind of, this effectively like darkens the sound a lot, and it's like it's taking all of that stuff and running it into a cab, which is then mic'd up. And it has the effect of kind of like darkening the sound, getting rid of some of that high end, which you can see there was a bunch of steps where I was introducing more high end, and that's partially because this does darken it, but it adds a really nice character and it feels like it's more in a room. It's such a nice kind of like menacing character that it gives to the sound, and it kind of makes it feel like it's more in a room. But obviously it does change the tone quite a lot, so it's kind of worth knowing if you plan on introducing that step. It's worth knowing that you're going to do that, because you know it does have a pretty big impact, and like preparing for that step because it has a pretty big impact on the sound. Then I've introduced this, which is this R bass, which kind of adds a lot of like sub content. Yeah, it just makes the bass sound a little bit more muscular and a little bit more solid. I don't always use this, but I think for this particular tone, I really like what it does. Then what's next? A compressor preset. So this is just called Punchy Bass Guitar, and I will have adjusted the threshold to make sure that it's operating on the bass in the correct way. This is doing a little bit more, minus 2 dB of compression. And for this particular track, I felt like the bass sound needed to be this big, like squashed, quite dense thing, just because of the nature of the riffs and because of the nature of the guitar part and what kind of a song it is. So for this part of the song, I felt like it needed this kind of an approach. That sounds pretty cool. And then moving along, this is a multi-band compressor. And I think I've kind of used this not only to control the dynamics, but then also like shape it a little bit more too. So this upper mid, not only am I applying some compression, but there's a 2 dB boost. The other way around with the low end, I guess maybe this R bass feels like it's introduced a little bit too much, and the impulse response has darkened the sound a bit too much. So I'm almost just like shaping it a bit with this multiband, which I do kind of enjoy doing from time to time. It definitely controls that low end a little bit and gives just some of the higher content a little bit more encouragement. And then this is I guess a fairly complicated looking EQ curve here. Again, I'm getting rid of some of the 200 hertz to make some space for the snare drum. I'm getting rid of a lot of like super low stuff. Yeah, I guess some of this is just general shaping. Like obviously there's scooping out some of the mid-range, and there's another little top-end boost, which obviously is potentially compensating for some of what the impulse response does. But then there's also a couple notches here where I guess I've tried to get rid of some frequencies that I didn't like very much. And also this kind of like high and low pass thing, I think is just trying to get rid of some of the stuff that isn't particularly useful to a bass guitar. So obviously everything below 50 and then everything above 7,500. So there's just some slightly annoying whistling frequencies. That one doesn't seem too bad, but yeah, this is just some kind of final tone shaping to that part of the bass sound. it does seem to make it sound a little bit more controlled and behave itself just a little bit more. So let's listen to it with the drums engaged. And let's go from the beginning of this riff. And so there you can now see that that multi-band compressor is working because the kick drum is being fed into it. And you can see it ducking by a fair amount every time that kick drum hits. Okay, so that is the bass tone for the kind of big, heavy sections of the song. So let's maybe look at the bass guitar for the cleaner, more delicate, arpeggiated sections of the song. Now this, I didn't feel like these needed to be super low. So for these sections, I abandoned the MIDI bass and just used my Squier vintage modified and quite heavily modified by me 5-string jazz bass. Really cool bass guitar. It was very basic, but it's got some really nice pickups in it now and a nice bridge, and I think it sounds pretty decent. I've used a very similar approach here. So we've got our low clean portion of the sound, and then we've got our high gnarly distorted. I think before I had only used the low clean, but then during the course of mixing, I felt like it was just lacking a little bit and it wasn't particularly lively in that section. So I added the same kind of philosophy as this big heavy bass sound. I added that in the verses. So let's take a look at that. So obviously these are coming into this master bus, and there they are. So I've turned off all the processing with those, and let's just listen to one of them. Let's just turn off the bass, the drums rather, as well. Right, that's just the DR of my 5-string jazz bass. A compressor called DI Attack Enhancer, where I've adjusted the threshold to be acting on the signal as is appropriate. Yeah, so I've set that threshold quite low actually, so it's doing quite a lot. And then after that, I have added, again, this TSE Audio SansAmp kind of emulator thing. Which I think sounds super cool, like kind of growly, slightly clanky. Yeah, love how that sounds. It seems to be a little bit more driven. Let's just have a quick look. Okay. No, it's very similar. Very similar to what I've got on the kind of DR portion of the heavy part of the song. Very similar sound. Maybe a bit like more presence or something, because I felt like that was needed in the verse. And then on top of that, let's just look at the dirty one. So again, this is just going to be like just bass DR. Nothing exciting about this. Same again, same as the previous setup. I have just, hard passing, getting rid of all the low stuff. So that's what that sounds like. My bad. I didn't end up using this one in the end, so I'm actually just going to remove that. What I did end up using was this one. Which I do a lot because I think the bass tones, especially in the expansion packs for Easy Mix, are awesome. And I use this one all the time. This Frederick from Meshuggah, some of his presets are rad. And I use them loads. Definitely doesn't make it sound as bad as like some of this processing here with the Fort Nameless and the Archetype. But but it's gnarly enough for the role it's playing in this song. So if we put these together, listening to it in isolation like that, I wonder if maybe I could have dropped this down a little bit lower, because I think this one sounds pretty cool, and like there's just a lot of grit creeping in with this one, but it sounds pretty cool. So let's see what the main master bus processing is doing. Punchy bass guitar compressor with threshold adjusted, no doubt. Let's just run this from the beginning. It's really not doing very much, like 1.5 dB of compression or something like that. Not very much at all. And then next, this is very similar to the other bass tone, which is a multi-band compressor, getting rid of everything kind of below where the kick drum would probably be taking care of things, and that is sidechained to the kick drum so that it will duck this bass guitar signal every time the kick drum hits. And then finally, there's just a bit of upper boost, probably just because I thought it was appropriate in the context of the song. Not doing very much, but yeah, just making it a little bit brighter. Okay, so with the drums too, we can have a quick listen to that. I mean, it is a fairly kind of like gnarly sound for this part of the song. It's quite like a delicate part of the song. There's some stacked harmony vocals, clean vocals, and, you know, a slightly crunchy arpeggiated guitar. But it's a fairly delicate part of the song. So obviously it's incredibly simple. The part's very simple. The drum part's quite simple. It doesn't need to be doing as much as other parts of the song. Finally, there is 1/3 kind of bass thing to look at, which is right here. It's kind of this area between these two clean portions of the song. You can kind of see this first verse is very sparse in terms of the bass playing, and then it gets a little bit more busy, probably as the drum part changes. Yeah, you can see the drum MIDI changes there. So I was trying to have the bass part react a bit more to that drum part. But right in the middle here is a part where I think I was particularly inspired by a band called Holy Fawn and their song Dark Stone off Death Spells, their album called Death Spells. And in the song Dark Stone, in the intro, there's these big, like kind of monstrous distorted bass stabs that come in during this quite quiet, delicate intro. And yeah, it just sounds awesome. So I think I was probably trying to do something like that, but obviously in the context of the song with quite a lot of other things going on. And let's have a very quick listen to that. And so you can hear it there. There's like, because of the guitar riff I'd written, there's a kind of big slide down from the 12th fret down to open. And I was struggling to make that work with MIDI. So I decided to just abandon the MIDI and I would just play it. So obviously here, the bass guitar is doing all of the work. There is no MIDI, there's no gin bass happening, just so that I can play the parts exactly how I want to. But what it also means is that obviously here the bass guitar is in unison with the guitar part. It's not a whole octave lower. I've obviously just dropped in the bass part into exactly the same tracks as the gin bass bounces here, and so they're being processed in exactly the same way. but obviously it's not MIDI, it's just being played on a guitar. I do tend to kind of compress the bass. I use a Maxon CP9 Pro Plus compression pedal, which I run my bass guitar through, and then from there it goes into the audio interface. So there is a bit of compression being applied to the bass guitar, but obviously, as you can see, it is a bit more dynamic than what we're getting from Gen Bass. So yeah, that kind of summarizes effectively 3 approaches to the bass guitar, which were all required on this song. And you can kind of see that runs through the song. So wherever we've got a kind of more clean, delicate verse section, it's just the bass guitar playing. And then when we've got the big distorted sections, we've got the MIDI, as well as a kind of a clank bass track, if you like, that is performed and laid on top of the MIDI. And then those big stabs in the middle of the verses, which is all just played on the guitar. Cool. I hope that was useful. We will jump on to guitars next. Cheers.